Robservations with Robert, Meyer, Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I don't know what kind of an accent that is, and I am Robcasting at you! You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. And there are times when I want to sing songs, and I haven't felt so alive in years. Okay, that's a little Depeche Mode break for you. I don't know how good it was, but there you go. You know why? Because I am deliriously excited. You know how I always say to you kids out there, you know how I always say that amazing things can happen. Amazing shit is happening all around us in the post-geek singularity space. There's stuff that we wish for, we hope for, we want to be real. And you know what? More often than not, it's happening. It becomes real. And one of the things that I've most wanted, ladies and gentlemen, the things that I've most wanted, kind souls, gentle beings, however you identify, across the 28 known galaxies, since the dawn of the Blu-ray era, since I got my PlayStation 3 from Mary Forrest in 2007, there's one thing that I've wanted more than any other things on physical media. And that is, I wanted a real HD restoration of the 2001 Director's Edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture. My friends were involved. The great Darren Doctorman, who did visual effects on Tango Shalom, was the visual effects supervisor. But because of Star Trek the Motion Pictures, because of the limitations of home video at the time when they started this restoration back in 2000, it was only NTSC, garbage NTSC video. They didn't future-proof it for HD. They didn't have the kind of budget to do it. And ever since then, I mean, especially when Blu-ray technology came out and everything was being restored in HD, and now in 4K, which is 6 times better than regular standard HD. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the rumors have been flying fast and furious. Even coy Darren Doctorman, who has a mouth like a steel trap. He won't ever reveal anything. I mean, you could waterboard that man and he would still not say a word. I mean, the only other person that talks less than Darren Doctorman in the Star Trek world is Mike Akuda. You can't get anything out of either one of them. But today, Darren's maybe hinted, but said nothing. Today, on StarTrek.com, mere moments ago. Oh, moments ago, look at this. The Director's Edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture, set to be fully restored. This is by the StarTrek.com staff. This was dropped at 2:45, less than an hour ago. Director's Edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture, set to be fully restored. You know, this was my dad's birthday. It would have been his 98th birthday today. So this is my birthday present, my dad's birthday present to me. Paramount and Paramount Plus are excited to announce that a full restoration of the Director's Edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture has been greenlit. The restoration will be undertaken by producer David C. Fine, restoration supervisor Mike Mendocino, and visual effects supervisor Darren R. Doctorman, all of whom worked previously with director Robert Wise. The film will be prepared for presentation in 4K Ultra HD with Dolby Vision. Dolby Vision, oh my God. These are tears of joy, ladies and gentlemen. Tears of joy. I can't wait. The film will be prepared for presentation in 4K Ultra HD with Dolby Vision, high dynamic range, and a new Dolby Atmos soundtrack. The restoration is expected to take 6 to 8 months and will launch with an exclusive window on Paramount Plus. How about releasing it theatrically, folks? As many of you know, Star Trek The Motion Picture is by far my favorite Star Trek movie. Am I saying it's the best Star Trek movie? No. I think everyone knows that the best Star Trek movie is Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. But Star Trek The Motion Picture is easily my favorite Star Trek movie, and I think it's, if you watch it, I can make an argument that it's most like the original series. But a lot of people always say, Rob, especially Adrian Iscaria, if he's watching this show, the producer of the Hitman series, he's out there right now grinding his teeth thinking I'm an idiot. We go back and forth on this all the time. Adrian Iscaria is, of course, wrong. And I mean that like Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor saying, wrong! To Lois Lane in Superman Returns. That wrong. It is, I cannot tell you to get this movie what it's going to look like in 4K. I can't wait. And, you know, I actually contributed to the first version. I gave them I had a 1-inch videotape. Actually, pardon me. A 2-inch videotape of all of the commercials. The promos that were done for Star Trek The Motion Picture that were voiced by who? Who did the voiceover? Trivia question. Who did the voiceover for the trailer and the TV spots for Star Trek The Motion Picture? Ding, 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 ding. That's right, Orson Welles. For those of you who said Orson Welles, you are correct. This is incredibly exciting. It's really the last thing that I wanted to get on 4K. I don't mean like the last thing I wanted. I mean, this is the last thing I really want and need in 4K. I mean, I'll still collect 4K discs, but this was it. This was one of the last of the grails, especially the grails in HD. Oh my God, I cannot tell you. I don't know why all of a sudden my happiness has made me think about the song But Not Tonight, Depeche Mode song But Not Tonight, off Black Celebration, which wasn't even originally released on Black Celebration. It was like a single. Oh God, it's raining, but I'm not complaining. I don't know why. I've been thinking about this song since this news dropped for an hour. How weird. You make these weird associations in life. I don't know why. I love Black Celebration. Princess dies wearing a new dress. There are flies on the... Death is everywhere. There are flies on the windscreen. I'm no David Gahan, but whatever. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. I'm so excited. 8 months, that means maybe... 8 months. We have to wait till 2022, which is all good. Anyway, let me just take a deep breath here. I know I'm a little overexcited. Little crazy. I'm hyperventilating. I'm like going to meet the Beatles for the first time or something. I'm screaming. I'm in the audience in the Ed Sullivan Show. People are like, what, Rob? Where are you going? I know, free association. I'm so excited. I'm just going to bring it down. Bring it down a little bit. To talk about the subject at hand. The subject at hand is obviously the Cannes Film Festival just started yesterday. And for those of you who haven't heard yet, of course, you know that the latest project that I've been involved in, the feature film Tango, Shalom, that I produced, I edited, and I was also the visual effects supervisor. And who was one of my visual effects artists? That's right, Darren Doctorman, the visual effects supervisor of what? Say it with me now. That's right, the director's edition of Star Trek The Motion Picture. Anyway, so Star Trek The Motion Picture Director's Edition in 4K and Tango Shalom have something in common. The great Darren Doctorman. And, by the way, Tobias Richter, who I work with on Axonar. Both of these gentlemen, Star Trek legends all, worked with me for Tango Shalom. Tango Shalom was at the Cannes Film Festival. But you know what else was at the Cannes Film Festival? Albeit it was in May and not July because of the pandemic. Cannes was pushed a couple months. But 20 years ago, at the Cannes Film Festival in 2001, the first 20-plus minutes of Lord of the Rings were first revealed to the public. No one had seen anything. They hadn't released a trailer. And they showed the first 20 minutes of Lord of the Rings. Now, at the time, 20 years ago, I was working for Michael Pellerin and Jeff Curdy, a good Seattleite. And Jeff Curdy and Michael Pellerin had a company called Curdy Pellerin Productions that I started working at the end of... Actually, I started working at Curdy Pellerin in the summer of 2000. And it really began my professional career working on special features for DVDs and later Blu-rays. And the first project I worked on for them was Fantasia. And how that worked was I was working at NBC as a Predator, as a producer editor, and I did over 100 promo spots for the 2000 Olympics, and I was promoted upstairs, and I worked at NBC 2000, and I got to do things like help launch the 2000-2001 primetime campaign. I got to go to the sets of Third Rock from the Sun and West Wing and Will and Grace, and I got to film black and white behind-the-scenes footage, and then we turned them into promos and everything, and I loved working at NBC. But during the summer of 2000, I was working at NBC from 9 in the morning to 7 at night. Then I would drive into Hollywood, actually have dinner, and then at 8 o'clock at night, I started working at Curdy Pellerin because Michael Pellerin was a friend of mine, and I worked on the Fantasia documentaries that was on the Fantasia anthology. It was Fantasia 2000, and our special features disc. So I worked there from 8 o'clock at night to usually like 2 in the morning. I'd go to bed. I'd go home, go to bed, and then I would be up at like 7:30 and get to NBC by 9. And that's what I did for the whole summer. But anyway, after my stint at NBC ended, I started working back at Curdy Pellerin full time. And during that time, I was working on my feature-length Tron documentary, and I worked on a number of Snow White. I worked on The Emperor's New Groove. I worked on a lot of Disney films, but the Tron feature-length documentary was what I directed and edited. That was the biggest thing I was doing. But through a long series of events, we were awarded the contract to produce all of the special features for the extended editions of the Lord of the Rings movies. Very exciting. But at the time, nobody really knew how this was going to go. And the Lord of the Rings films were, I think, to this day, the single ballsiest decision the head of a studio has ever made. I would say in the history of Hollywood, probably. Now, why is that? I'll give you a little bit of backstory. So originally, Peter Jackson was working with Miramax, Bob and Harvey Weinstein, and they were going to make 2 Lord of the Rings movies. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out. The guys at Miramax said, okay, well, they got cold feet. And so Peter Jackson, who already had his Weta Workshop and the fledgling Weta Digital, they were working on making Lord of the Rings. They were building armor and doing R&D and testing. They were working with the massive software where they could actually have digitally created crowd scenes where each character in the crowd scene would do something different. They were creating all kinds of things to make Lord of the Rings. But literally, the rug was pulled out from under them. And Miramax had all of the cards, and they basically said, look, okay, we're not going to make this movie, but we will allow you, Peter Jackson, to see if you can find someone else to make these films. However, I think they needed to be bought out for like $50 million, and they got 5% of the gross of the receipts. They made it extraordinarily difficult for Peter Jackson to go get this set up somewhere else. And he basically had a week. So he went to all of these meetings. He had meetings in, if memory serves, in New York. And his last meeting was in L.A. with Bob Shea, who ran New Line Cinema. New Line had been around. New Line had been releasing. I think they first released Evil Dead, actually, theatrically. But they had done the Nightmare on Elm Street films and things like The Hidden. But they'd had great success with Nightmare on Elm Street. So, they were. This was and Peter Jackson had obviously he'd done Bad Taste. He'd done Brain Dead. He had done Meet the Feebles. He had done The Frighteners, which was his biggest movie that wasn't that well received, and he'd done The Beautiful Heavenly Creatures, which at the time I think was his best movie. So he had known Bob Shea because he was working on one of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels. So. And Mark Ordesky, who was working with Bob Shea and had heard about Lord of the Rings and suggested they meet with Peter Jackson. And this was going to be Peter Jackson's last stop before he got on a plane, flew back to New Zealand, and pulled the plug on Lord of the Rings. All the development work, all the people that were already working on it, with the understanding Miramax was going to make it, it was all going to come crashing to a halt. And Peter Jackson was down to his ride, man. That was it. Everyone had said no. Everyone had turned him down. And Peter Jackson had a 5-minute tape that he was showing people, a 5-minute presentation reel of all the work that was being done at Weta at the time. And the way it was conveyed to me, and by the way, when we did the special features for Lord of the Rings, the one interview that we did not get was Bob Shea. And I had offered to do it, and I really wanted to do this interview because this is the one question that I wanted to ask him. So Peter Jackson came into this room with Bob Shea and showed Bob Shea this tape, this 5-minute tape. And after the lights came up or whatever, the way I remember hearing it about this story, it's secondhand, but the way I remember hearing the story is Bob Shea's first words were something to the extent of, wait a minute, you were going to make 2 movies for Miramax? Well, aren't there 3 Lord of the Rings books? Obviously, it's Fellowship of the Ring, 2 Towers, and Return of the King. Aren't there 3? Well, why don't you make 3 movies? And they were off to the races. So basically what Bob Shea had done, he'd been building New Line Cinema up for over 2 decades. Well, actually about 2 decades at this point. And he made the single ballsiest decision in what I think is the history of Hollywood to make 3 films simultaneously with director Peter Jackson in New Zealand. Now, Peter Jackson's biggest foray into studio filmmaking was The Frighteners. Produced by Robert Zemeckis, a beloved film, certainly, but not exactly a movie that set the world on fire financially. So Bob Shea basically bet the entirety of his future fortunes on Peter Jackson, and he also bet on New Zealand and everybody in New Zealand, people like Richard Taylor, that they could pull off The Lord of the Rings. I mean, it was a roll of the dice, like no roll of the dice ever. It was all in the way I don't think any studio executive could possibly fathom today. It was a move that only an indie maverick that had built his own company up could have made. Nobody who was educated at an Ivy League business school in the last 25, 30 years would ever have made this choice. I don't think we're ever going to see. I mean, we're talking clanking brass balls that could be heard all the way from, I don't know, Fresno to Temecula. Who knows? I don't even know. What a terrible, never mind. I don't even know what I'm saying. But anyway, it was a big decision, and Bob Shea went all in. Now, cut to us. The Lord of the Rings movies had basically been in production since '99, and we really hadn't seen anything. We got awarded the job. We hadn't seen anything. I think Michael had seen something, but they were unveiling the first footage. It was going to be a 20-minute plus reel at the Cannes Film Festival 20 years ago this year, although remember this was in May. And so we were all like, oh my God, are we going to be able to see what they showed at the Cannes Film Festival? And a group of us, basically the team, the core team, I want to say like there was 20 of us at Curdy Pellerin. We were invited pretty soon after the Cannes Film Festival. I want to say within a week or 2, we were invited to the New Line screening room to watch the 20 minutes of Lord of the Rings. I have to say, in my life, now remember, nobody stateside had seen this. I mean, other than New Line executives and whoever they were showing it to. So I can't say that our team was the first people in the United States to see it. Clearly we weren't. But I think outside of New Line proper, maybe, we sat down in the theater at New Line, at the screening room off Robertson in Beverly Hills. We sat down, and that 20-minute reel, I have to say, and remember, no one had seen any footage from Lord of the Rings. And, fantasy films, sword and sorcery, dragons, there weren't a lot of them. Dragon Slayer, but that was 81. And we're talking 20 years later. Because we saw this in summer of 2001. So it probably was literally 20 years ago, maybe a month ago, sometime in June. We saw a lot of the Mines of Moria sequence. I'd never seen any, I'd seen every science fiction, fantasy, and horror film made to that point, practically, almost all of them. And we were all sitting in there. When it was over, when the lights came up, I'm like, I'd never seen anything like it. And the closest thing I could equate it to was seeing Star Wars for the first time. because the evocation of fantasy worlds and creatures and all this. I mean, I was just like, I was blown the fuck away. Like it was, there were times, and what was interesting. I think that was the last time I had my mind blown in a theater. The time previous to that was seeing The Matrix. When I first saw The Matrix, I went to a screening at the Steve Ross Theater, and we were all making fun of it in line because people were like, oh, is this like Johnny Mnemonic 2? Even though that was directed by Robert Longo, a visual artist I was a huge fan of. I mean, I even went and saw a Robert Longo exhibit, and anyway, that's a long story. I can't tell you that story. It's not for family audiences, but it involved a girl and inside of the LA County Museum of Art. But we won't talk about that now. But anyway, so that's when I was at the Robert Longo exhibit there. But I was blown away by The Matrix. And I think before The Matrix, it was probably Jurassic Park. But as I was growing up, Jaws blew me away. Logan's Run blew me away the year after that. Star Wars, of course, changed my life. Superman the movie. Alien, and then, seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture kind of blew me away. But Lord of the Rings blew me away, not since Star Wars. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe the realization of fantasy realms and these creatures and how the Mines of Moria sequence was so mind-blowing and the threat was so real. I couldn't believe it. And we walked out of that theater and we're like, oh my God, we get to spend the next 3 years immersed in telling the story of how they made this movie. And we hadn't even seen the movie yet. We just seen the 20-minute can reel. Now, I was beside myself with excitement. I think we all were. And of course, during those 3 years, I got to do things like go to England and interview Christopher Lee I go to London for the first time and interview Christopher Lee for 5 hours. Of course, I spent months in New Zealand recording audio commentaries and doing all kinds of interviews. I mean, it was just incredible. The whole thing was incredible. So they were celebrating, there's an article in Deadline today, celebrating the triumph when they showed this same 20 minutes previously to when we saw it at the Cannes Film Festival for the first time. They threw a $2 million party, and they treated these 20 minutes like a film premiere. And that's where they first showed it. Press event, just giant, worthy of Cannes, worthy of song, worthy of celebration. When we were making Free Enterprise, we met William Shatner's agent. And William Shatner's agent told me and told Mark Altman something about Hollywood that I thought was really interesting. And I loved him for this because he made a Hollywood metaphor. Kind of like Eli Cross, Peter O'Toole's director character, made in The Stuntman about King Kong. And he said that the thing about Hollywood is everybody wants to find King Kong. They want to know they have King Kong. I mean, I was like, Larry, come on, man. You know what happened with King Kong. But what he meant was the Carl Denham spectacle of being able to unveil King Kong to audiences and blow them away. And he would tell us, you guys, when we made Free Enterprise, you've got King Kong, and that's William Shatner. You needed King Kong for your movie, and you got him. But that's what people in Hollywood want. That's what they're looking for. And I can only imagine, like Bob Shea, and by the way, making the Lord of the Rings movies was no barrel of laughs. It was certainly no picnic, and there was risk involved. But to have this, they knew with this 20-minute reel, they had King Kong. So anyway, here is the article that was in Deadline today. I just want to share it with you because there's so much, and you don't have these kinds of balls anymore in Hollywood. There's nobody in Hollywood who would do this. Nobody. So Mike Fleming published this article at 9 a.m. this morning. Lord of the Rings trilogy, a look back at the breathtaking gamble 20 years later. Ever since Bob Shea launched the company in 1967 to release art house, foreign language, and cult films on college campuses, New Line Cinema had been a studio known for out-of-the-box choices necessitated by being the last stop for good material. From the audacious early John Waters films like Pink Flamingos to Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, New Line found gems others missed, even after Ted Turner bought the studio. New Line had launched Jim Carrey with The Mask, leveled up Mike Myers with Austin Powers, and given a home to filmmakers like Paul Thomas Anderson with Boogie Nights and David Fincher with Seven. Shea had shown his studio to be a place of creative risk-taking. But New Line had never taken a financial risk like Lord of the Rings. As a matter of fact, no one else in Hollywood had. 3 films, each with budgets of $120 million, filmed back-to-back over a protracted shoot in New Zealand. Presiding over the project was filmmaker Peter Jackson, at that time best known for small-budget flicks like Heavenly Creatures, Brain Dead, and Meet the Feebles, whose only studio-backed project, The Frighteners, with Michael J. Fox, had been a commercial failure. On paper, none of it looked like a recipe for success. Indeed, by 2001, there was a decided perception that the failure of the first film, The Fellowship of the Ring, could sink Shea's studio and some of the international distributors whose pre-sales allowed New Line to make its films. The Cannes Film Festival would play a major role in turning around the skeptics and settling the nerves of all involved. Cannes has always been an international launchpad for films, but Shea and Jackson came armed only with 26 minutes of footage of a film that would not be finished for months. Still, they treated it like a film premiere, with distributors and junket press brought to the Chateau de Castellarias, a castle in nearby, Moissartot, that was, I'm so American, was transformed into Middle-earth by the art departments and set designers of the trilogy. It would be another $2 million gamble for Shea and his team, but it would prove to be an important chapter on the route to release for what would become the most successful series of independent movies ever made. It was Bob who came up with the idea of leaning into Cannes of 2001, says Jackson's longtime agent and manager, Ken Kamins. Let's blow people away. But of course, once you decide you're going to spend $2 million on a party and treat 26 minutes like a premiere, the stakes are total. Get it right, and you're on your way to something really important and powerful. Get it wrong, and you've made the biggest miniseries in the history of TNT. 20 years on, Deadline has gathered some of the principals who took one of the most pressurized rides in all of Hollywood history to recall the films and that memorable night in Cannes where everything clicked, presaging the 3 straight years of blockbusters, a near $3 billion global gross, and a collective 30 Oscar nominations and 17 wins, including Best Picture for 2003's Return of the King. Says Shea, if you were there that night in Cannes, it would be something you'd always remember. Hell, I'll always remember it, and I just saw the damn thing, those 26 minutes in the New Line screening room on Robertson in Beverly Hills. No matter what else he does, Bob Shea will be defined by this: saying yes to Peter Jackson's last-ditch attempt to turn J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings trilogy into 2 films after Disney's Michael Eisner turned down Miramax bosses Harvey and Bob Weinstein. Other studios had also said no, and Shea was Jackson's last chance. Literally, he was going from this meeting to get on a plane to pull the plug. The Weinsteins gave Jackson a daunting challenge: a week to shop a project that would call for them to get 5% of first dollar gross. If Jackson found no takers, he would withdraw, and Miramax would find another filmmaker willing to tell the sprawling tale in a single film. Shea watched a VHS presentation and listened to how Jackson would execute his plan. He then gave the filmmaker another no. It shouldn't be 2 films, he said. It should be a trilogy. A holiday blockbuster for 3 years straight. It became one of the I'm getting chills reading this. It became one of the ballsiest executive decisions in Hollywood history. We had always been the outsider, recalls Shea. I wish we had had this interview on the documentaries. Until we got to the Ted Turner financing thing, we were always the last guy in town that anybody would think of to pitch a project. On Lord of the Rings, we had Time Warner behind us at that point, but nobody understood who we were, including CEO Jerry Levin, the entire Time Warner staff. We were just kind of left over from some crazy moment that Ted Turner had. They wanted to sell us from the moment the merger took place between Time Warner and Turner. When Shea read the trade stories about Miramax's plans for the Tolkien books, I thought it was a really good idea, he says. Then production president Mike DeLuca and Mark Ordesky, president of New Line's prestige film label Fine Line, came into my office one day and said it looked like Weinstein was going to make this available to the community. Are we interested? I said, yeah, in principle, it's going to be an incredible opportunity, but what's the situation? Mark said, well, one of the few things that's really going to turn you off is that the Weinsteins personally are getting 5% of the first dollar gross as part of the deal. Bob Shea says, to hell with that. That's definitely not happening. Not in a million years. I'm going to give Weinstein 5% of the gross? Forget about it. Shea thought that was the end of it, but the seed had been planted, or as they said in the Invasion of the Body Snatchers ad campaign, and terror grows. I don't know why I said that. It just popped into my head. He was fond of Jackson, who'd written a treatment for one of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, and who was close to Ordesky, sleeping on the exec's couch when he came to L.A. from New Zealand in those early days. Jackson was making the kind of movies that fit New Line's formula. Tight-budget genre. I'd seen Meet the Feebles and Brain Dead. We were part of that subset of movie making, Shea says. We were not high society. We were street people. And then Peter made Heavenly Creatures, which I thought was a really excellent movie. And then The Frighteners, which I was less enthusiastic about. When Ordesky told Shea that the Weinsteins were officially seeking partners and Jackson was in L.A. to pitch Rings, Shea took the meeting as a courtesy. He was still adamant that he wouldn't accept the Weinsteins' financial ultimatum, but Ordesky urged him to at least hear Jackson's presentation. Things had changed in the period since DeLuca and Ordesky first told Shea about the potential opportunity. Time Warner had acquired Ted Turner's library, and it was uncertain how New Line fit in alongside Warner Brothers. Shea was also clashing with his wonderkind picture picker, Mike DeLuca, and wanted to bolster the slate. What happened in the interim was Mike and I were having a sort of interpersonal conflict, disagreements about operating procedures, Shea recalls. My partner, Michael Lynn, kept saying, "We don't have enough movies, and where are the sequels?" I was getting more and more frustrated with our development and more inclined to be open to possibilities because I knew that we really weren't in such great shape for the next year or two. I was not particularly interested in proving myself to anybody but perhaps Ted Turner. With all of that concern in the back of my mind, I walked into the conference room to see what Peter had put together. Shea was extremely impressed, not just with Jackson's vision, but with his meticulous plan to execute it. Peter said, "We don't have to go to a fancy special effects house to get this stuff. We've got a little studio called Wingnut in New Zealand and an algorithm we developed so we can have big crowd scenes where all the different figures in a crowd don't do the same thing because you're just repeating the same technique over and over and over. We've developed a way that every character looks like they're doing something different. It's going to be a lot less expensive than going to get custom designs for every group of characters." The other really innovative thing was he said he would use forced perspective to make the Hobbit small and humans like Gandalf regular size in the same frame. He'd do that with different focal lengths on the camera, creating the illusion that one is larger and one is smaller. Then I saw the reel and it really worked. It was excellent. Here's a message to all you budding filmmakers. Knowing how you're going to do something always benefits you when you're pitching your project. Shea bought into Jackson's vision in the room. See, I wish we could have had this interview because this is what's missing from our special features. Jackson's budget was $60 million to film at that point, and New Line could cover that. In the time they'd been with Ted Turner, they hadn't been questioned about their spending. All of our films had been successful with one exception, Little Nicky, Shea says. They must have thought they were dealing with sorcerers or something because nobody ever said, "You can't do this." In his mind, Rings could be New Line's very own version of the James Bond franchise, with a banner blockbuster released each year. And the 5% first dollar gross to the Weinsteins? Sure, the 5% pissed me off tremendously, but I wasn't going to cut off my nose to spite my face, Shea says. The fact that I didn't get along with Harvey Weinstein and that we were bitterly competitive with that company, I wasn't going to say no. And of course, I knew we were the last stop on Peter's trip. That also didn't bother me. I've been insulted before. He'd made up his mind before Jackson's presentation was even over. And then Peter comes in with his production designer who has these 40 by 60 full-color pictures of the landscape and locations in New Zealand, a place I knew nothing about. I was floored. I'm telling you, the more planned out, the more you can go into people, especially people that are going to say yes or no to you, and prove to them that you know exactly how you're going to make your movie, kids. That's what you need to do. There was still plenty of risk. Jackson was unproven as the director of an event-sized trilogy, and so was New Zealand as a reliable production hub. Shea didn't know how determined Jackson was to change all that. You have to know this about Peter, says Kamins. There was a sense of civic and national pride that he was also wearing because he really wanted this desperately for New Zealand. The first time I ever went to go visit Peter in New Zealand, he put on one of the James Bond films. I can't remember which one, but there was a sequence where there is a glass map of the world. Peter hits pause and says, "What do you see?" I said, "I'm not sure what I'm looking at." He goes over to where Australia is and he points. He said, "Take a look. New Zealand is not on that map." Then he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, "But it will be." Still, the budget was a guess, and shooting multiple movies at once just wasn't done. Studios would rather pay a premium to regroup a cast than be left holding the bag if the first one failed. Many fantasy films with franchise aspirations never get past the first film. If I might editorialize right here, one of the benefits of doing these movies all at one time is you're amortizing the costs of all the films across 3 movies. So you don't have to start and stop and start and stop and start and stop. So it was an interesting way to make all these films. Plus, look, is it a grueling shoot? Yeah, you're going to be shooting for over a year. You're going to kill your cast and crew. That's the downside. The upside is, well, you're going to get 3 movies out of it. And if you bet on your tools, you bet on your talent, you bet on the ability of everybody, which is what you should do. I'm looking at you, Dune. I mean, you want to do 3 Dune movies? Dune, Dune Prophet, and Dune Messiah until the whole Paul Atreides arc? I know, but Rob, I mean, what if the first movie fails? Hey, you know what? If you're committing to making Dune, you should make Dune. You know, they've made half of the first book. There's basically 2 books that tell the Paul Atreides story. I mean, yes, it lingers on. I know. Children of Dune. Yes, I get it. And then God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, and Chapter House Dune. I know. But if I was running Warner Brothers and I had Denis Villeneuve making Dune with that cast, I'd go all in. Just saying. I'd go all in. That was part of the final betting. I like this betting process when Peter just happened to slip that in. Shay recalls, I said, no, let's do them one at a time and see how it goes. He said, no. We have to do them all at once. The actors are going to be older. It's going to take a year to get the films done and 1 film released. Many of these locations will require us to build roads to bring in equipment in, and we'll have to completely cut up a significant part of the landscape. The New Zealand government won't allow us to keep those roads in the disarray. So the bottom line was there was no way around it. All 3 had to be made at once. New Line's international chief, Rolf Mitweg, had been selling the project as a trilogy anyway, so they moved ahead. But the doubt still remained in Shay's mind. If the first film had been a failure, some international distribution partners were likely going to attempt to back out of an ongoing deal. Well, that was the risk, but there's always a risk in every film, Shay declares. There could be a snowstorm the day you open. The term risk-free movie is an oxymoron. The point is, I thought that the risk was sufficiently covered by the prospects of success. It was a risk that I was willing to take, the kind of decision that people who make production decisions have to make all the time. You weigh the risk against the reward, and if the balance is substantially enough in your favor, you dive off the high board. That's just the way the movie business is. The pressure, though, never stopped mounting. It soon became clear $60 million wouldn't be enough to cover the costs of production for each movie. That would have to double. It was then that Shay began to consider the long odds of the bet he'd made. Peter was either trying to blow smoke around my head or he didn't have a clue himself. But when we sent our own production team down to Wellington to see what was going on, they came back and said the first film could not be made for anything less than $120 million. Shay says, I went back to Rolf and I said, we're going to have to change the percentages and the prices that we're getting for international because Peter got it wrong. You can't make this film for $60 million, so it couldn't be done. Rolf said, I definitely want it and it will be fine. Good on you, Rolf. So I went for it. The risk to the foreign distribution partners cannot be overstated. The deal was to buy all 3 or none. See, I'm telling you, Bob Shay, the balls on you, man. The balls. I wish somebody in Hollywood had a tenth of your balls. But the world's different now. I know those pesky shareholders got to keep those quarterly reports coming in. The international pre-sales were a big part of the financing, and what we did had never been done before, says Cam Galano, who is New Line's EVP and European supervisor and made deals under Mitweg. Think about it. You're a distributor, and you're being asked to pay a very high price for not 1, but 3. Knowing if the first didn't work, you're stuck, just the way New Line would be stuck financing the movies. They were very expensive at the time, and there were so many unknowns. Then again, indie distributors rarely get to be in the middle of films with such potential, which at the time were the domain of the major studios. We were enthusiastic even though it seemed like a massive risk at the time, says Nigel Green, who was with his late brother Trevor, built Entertainment Film Distributors into the biggest indie distribution company in the UK, helped by being New Line's output partner in the region. We had to commit to 3 movies at the same time, and it was definitely the biggest commitment to a project or one film or trilogy. We'd made large commitments to productions, but never that size on an acquisition for UK rights. A lot of us were family-run companies, my brother and me, and Metropolitan in France with Sammy and Victor Hadida. Decisions were made by people who love film. I don't know that you would run numbers analytically and feel Rings was a safe bet. This was a bet made on enthusiasm and not technical calculations, because nobody had made a bet at that level on a trilogy financed in the way Bob and Michael did this. Says Mitweg, if you want to have high-profile movies, the one that can amass huge amounts of box office, you have to be prepared to take the risk. But 3 movies? When you're halfway through the first movie shoot, that's complicated. We teased them with some footage. Japan and the Far East we had a hard time with because they don't know the books. But we got a huge number from the UK and they did very well. Still, Mitweg doesn't sugarcoat the result if Fellowship had flopped. It would have been a suicide mission. There was enough anxiety to go around, but it wasn't until Shea had committed that he had questions about the filmmaker. He traveled to New Zealand with some international buyers who were still on the fence. I had a good faith feeling about Peter, Shea says. I don't say that you trust filmmakers all the time. I didn't really know his mindset, but I believed in him, and that was, by the way, a big risk. You give a guy from New Zealand $120 million to make a movie, and then you've got 2 more behind it? I had to think a lot about that. We decided to go to New Zealand, and Rolf wanted to take some of our key buyers who were still hesitant about buying into 3 pictures that were going to end up being $300 million. Peter put together a half-hour sample reel of dramatic scenes. As he waited for the film to be laced up in Jackson's screening room, he looked at the posters on the wall for Jackson's films Brain Dead, Meet the Feebles, and Heavenly Creatures. It suddenly struck me that this guy is making $50,000, $60,000, and $75,000 movies. Cheap exploitation films, and we're giving him $300 million, Shea recalls. This is really bloody crazy. I've almost never felt so panicked as I did at that moment. There are all these guys walking in to see if this screening of some of the acting scenes to decide whether they're going to be making huge guarantees and risking their companies. I felt like I'd been sold a bill of goods, and it was too late to do anything. When we went into the screening room, I really had my heart in my hands, so to speak. His skepticism about Jackson's ability to take the leap vanished in the 20 minutes it took to show the footage. The reel Peter put together had Ian McKellen and Orlando Bloom and everybody, Shea recalls. It was so good that I felt we could get the special effects and everything straightened out, bring our own people in it, do whatever was required. It was an excellent cast. It was well photographed. It was first-class stuff. And so we walked out of there with confidence. We actually closed almost all of our international deals off that trip to Wellington. I totally appreciate the position that New Line, Bob Shea, and Michael Lynn were in, and I don't look back on any of it and judge them remotely, Peter Jackson says now. There was a lot of pressure, and they were very upset with us as the budgets went up. The anger was understandable. They aren't the bad guys in this story. We're really the bad guys for going over budget. Eventually it stabilized when Barry Osborne came in as a producer a few months into shooting, when the movie was rebudgeted and realistic. We all felt a bit under siege, but looking back on it, I get it. I understand it all now much clearer. Being on the other side of the planet from Shea's nervousness probably helped, but Jackson recalls a moment when he was shooting the Helm's Deep scenes from 2 towers way up in a rock quarry in Wellington, and he could see Osborne lugging a large box with a cell phone because service was so unreliable, walking because the path was impassable by car. It was a period of time when New Line were at their most angry with us in terms of budget, Jackson remembers. I'm on the parapet, probably with Viggo Mortensen, and I see Barry Osborne. It took him about 30 minutes to huff and puff his way to get to the top, and so I kept on shooting. Barry arrives and says, I have the studio. I've got to connect you with Michael Lynn of New Line. Peter says, I ask why. Barry says, oh, he's going to threaten to sue you and sell the house from under you to cover the costs of overruns. Barry was just the messenger, but it was one of the only points where I really snapped. I said, just tell Michael Lynn I'm shooting this fucking film and I'm doing the best job I can, and I'm not going to interrupt my day with a phone call like that. Barry picked up the cell phone and made his way back down to the car and drove off. While Shea could be an ornery studio boss, Jackson saw a different side of him when he completed the first film. Jackson flew to Los Angeles with the footage that would eventually be shown in Cannes and set up a screening for Shay at Shay's house. Before it started, Bob signaled to me with his finger, come with me. I followed him, and we went into a bathroom, and he shut the door. I'm there alone in the bathroom with Bob Shay thinking, what the hell is this? He looked at me and he said, please, Peter, please. We have all these partners, and they're relying on the success of the film. If it doesn't work, they're going to go under. So I just want you to know how important it is for me that we don't let our partners down. And he began to cry. I mean, Bob began to sob. This is Bob Shay, the head of New Line, who greenlit this whole thing. Bob began to sob, and it was literally the most personal moment that I ever had with him. I just said to Bob, Peter Jackson, look, I'm doing my best, Bob. I hear you. I get it and I understand. And I'm trying to make the best film I can. He really cared. He was crying not on behalf of New Line. He was crying on behalf of all the international partners they'd brought on board to help finance the film. The Greens and the Hadidas, all the independent distributors that had bought into the project. He was crying on their behalf, not his own or his company's behalf. After shooting for a year and a half in isolation, Jackson himself had become somewhat troubled with what was being written about his films and the expectation of a looming catastrophe. People knew that 3 films were being shot, and a lot of press I read, and some of this was New Zealand press, would talk about how risky it was for New Line, and that if the first film failed, New Line would probably cease to exist because they'd be stuck with 2 other films they couldn't do anything with. Jackson says, it's totally understandable press would speculate about the worst-case scenario. These thoughts were going through our minds as well to some degree, but what bothered me is some were written as a fait accompli. Fantasy is always unsuccessful at the box office, and New Line is taking crazy risks with this unknown director, so let's talk about the failure and how bad it might be. Rather than rattling him, this criticism fueled Jackson. Peter says, I'm the sort of guy that if I read people are speculating on how much I'm going to fail, well, that makes me all the more determined not to fail. I thought, I'm going to show you. I'm going to work like a crazy guy to make the best films I possibly can. In a sense, I'm grateful for those stories because I do look back on that as being something that really gave me the extra 10% to do the best job I could. Shay became confident enough after seeing Jackson's reel that he went for broke. By the way, this is the same reel that we saw in the New Line screening room, and I just have to reiterate how impressive it was. I mean, it was truly one of the moments in my life that I will cherish to see that because no one else had seen it other than everyone was blown away at Cannes, but that was a world away, and what did that mean? And I've always relied on my own sense of knowing what I think is good and what's bad to really understand. And I have to tell you, seeing that 26-minute reel was one of the greatest moments in terms of being a film goer in my whole life because I was there, man, and I got to see it before anybody else other than those at the Cannes Film Festival. And it truly was, as an imagination connoisseur like myself, a moment in my own life where I'm like, holy shit. I mean, it was amazing because there was nothing like it. Nothing like it. There was nothing analogous to this in cinema history. Shay became confident enough after seeing Jackson's reel that he went for broke to turn around the skeptical buzz on the film and build momentum for the late-year release. Shay decided on a Cannes premiere-style launch, unveiling 26 minutes of scenes, followed by a party stage at the historic Chateau de Castellarias, just outside of town. Actual sets from the movie were transported to turn the venue into Middle-earth, complete with cave trolls, ring wraiths, and Frodo's house in the Shire. It was $2 million well spent. Jackson came to Cannes with the cast and a reel that began with him and Gandalf in the wizard's wagon to introduce footage, which established the fellowship of men, hobbits, and an elf and a dwarf to deliver the ring to Mordor. Then came the entire breathtaking sequence as the group enters the underground mines of Moria, battling orcs, goblins, and the fiery demon Balrog. Everyone thinks this make-or-break moment of a big movie is the opening weekend, but in some respects, I think that Cannes screening was our opening weekend, certainly in terms of all these distributors being on board, Peter Jackson says. The success of the movie and its initial release was going to depend a lot on the amount of effort and hard work that the different distributors put into the film, because they were all in charge of promotion and marketing in their own territories. What the Cannes screening did was it motivated and united all of them in the sense that they realized this could be huge if they put in the extra effort. Says Peter Jackson's agent Sam Cummins. Those were high stakes, and boy, oh boy, could you feel it. I don't know if Bob remembers what I remember, which is me and Bob and Peter literally standing in the stairwell by the projection booth of the Olympia, waiting for the first screening to start. Both of them looked sick to their stomachs. They were both white as a sheet and couldn't breathe. They literally didn't know what was going to happen, and then the footage hit. We had a pretty good sense as people walked out that they were buzzing. And a number of us were getting reports from significant people who would normally occupy the Quisette, both in the media and other major distributors who didn't have the film. There was a buzz, and it was moving fast. You could feel that something important was happening. Says Galano, if I had to choose a word to describe the buyers, it would be euphoric. Sami Hadida, who has passed away but who was the head of the French distributor Metropolitan, saw me in the lobby and literally picked me up off the ground and kissed me on the mouth. He was so excited, recalls Mark Ordesky. I thought his face would break from smiling so big. Hadida's brother Victor credits that screening with turning their nerves into excitement. There was a sense it would change not just our company but everyone involved, he recalls. We sat alongside the press, all of us experiencing it at the same moment. Then the acute sense of being in the world of the movie at that party with 1,000 people. They recreated the Shire. It was incredible relief mixed with excitement. Aside from turning around the buzz, Jackson says Cannes helped everyone focus on finishing. It was also a revelation for actors who spent 1.5 years acting in a green screen. We had most of the principal cast there, the Hobbits, Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, and Liv Tyler, and it was the first time they'd seen the finished work, Jackson says. Imagine being Elijah Wood or Ian McKellen, and you'd shot The Mines of Moria scene in New Zealand probably 1.5 years earlier with green screens running around in the studio shouting at things. When Ian confronted the Balrog, he was on a green screen stage looking at a tennis ball, and then you're suddenly seeing the finished sequence scored with all the visual effects. It wasn't just the distributors of the press, it was the actors themselves getting a sneak preview in May of what this finished movie in December might be like. I just remember them all being very, very excited that all the work in New Zealand was going to pay off. Elijah Wood was a teenager when he put together an unsolicited audition tape that got him in the room with Jackson and Walsh and won him the Frodo role. He says Cannes made it clear to the entire cast this might be something special. They'd been cocooned in New Zealand in a way that insulated them from the insecurity and the budget concerns, but seeing Middle-earth realized on screen for the first time brought a level of excitement he hadn't expected. It showed so many things, he says, the level of artistry that Weta Digital and Peter's team were capable of in bringing that cave troll to life in a way that felt genius. To feel that palpable buzz of excitement in the air was wonderful. It became real. And the party, with cave trolls and ring wraiths on horseback, it was extraordinary, and I have not seen anything like it since. Shea could feel the shift when later he showed the footage to Time Warner's Levin, who asked him what territories were still available. I told him Germany might be available, and he said, I'm going to take it directly to our international people and hope we can buy it. I felt vindicated in the sense that we were always the little jerks nobody cared about, and all of a sudden they're looking for our product. That was quite satisfying. Sean Astin, who played Frodo's Hobbit companion Samwise Gamgee, feels that the reel and the reaction elevated the scope of the marketing campaign. The Cannes Film Festival showed what we knew, that the film was spectacular and we'd created something that would stand the test of time, he says. It filtered up, down, and all around. I remember the initial marketing campaign sort of missed the mark, treating it as a kind of Dungeons & Dragons thematic approach and missed the classical feel. I remember all of us in our hearts were sinking because we're like, oh no, maybe the studio or the marketing folks are expecting something different than what I think we've created. After Cannes, they got it right. The posters of just Elijah with his hands and the huge ring in it on bus stops and everything else, you didn't know if this would translate to box office success, and I watched Bob Shea and Michael Lynn sweating it. The rest, though, is history. While acrimony and lawsuits between New Line and Jackson would follow, Shea exited the studio he founded not long after the Oscar haul, an indie record gross of nearly $3 billion. Shea looks back on his big gamble with fondness. Except for the unfortunate imbroglios, which I hasten to add I had nothing to do with, that came about after the fact, and it was just about the hubris that develops in organizations when they think they're on the top of their game. I'm very proud of what happened, Shea reflects. I'm extremely fortunate and proud that Peter did such a great job. This really was lightning in a bottle. I never experienced anything like it, and of course I look back on the whole thing, or most of it, with great satisfaction and a modest but intense smile on my face. Asked how he gauges the risk Amazon Studios is taking, spending $460 million for a Lord of the Rings series that doesn't have Peter Jackson, Shea declines to answer directly. But it seems he would not be one to bet against Tolkien's Middle-earth. He says, I wouldn't try to second-guess them at all. I just wish them well. Well, there you have it. I mean, that was mostly a Bob Shea interview, and I've wanted to hear his side of the story for 20 years, since we started doing the special features on the extended versions of the Lord of the Rings movies. And I actually only worked on Fellowship and Two Towers, and then I was hired, my company that I started when I worked for Michael Pellerin was hired by Disney to go do Chronicles of Narnia. So I literally had to leave that company, which made me hireable to Disney, and went off on my own with Dave Parker and Anthony Spadili and Dave Scow, and we went and did Chronicles of Narnia and went back to New Zealand for 14 months. So anyway, that's there you go. So, you know, it's nice to have 20 years later my own little film, not that I'm comparing it at all to Lord of the Rings, but, you know, I had worked on it for a long period of time. It's in Cannes with our distributors. We already have distribution, obviously, and they are, in fact, out there selling our little movie and reading the story and reading. I mean, this is how Hollywood's supposed to work. You bet on creative talents. You might have disagreements, especially over budget, but you persevere, man. You persevere. As long as you have talented people that know what they're doing. And Jackson and his team obviously did. It's unbelievable. Just like EMF saying, oh! Anyway, that is amazing stuff. And I wanted to read that, share that with you because, man, it might be a little long. It might be a little long. But anyway, I thought that I would share that with you. And let's see, I got letters now. Don't think that I don't, because I have letters. And this first letter, I got to say, I love this. This comes from Damon Locks. Hello, Robert. Long-time watcher, first-time writer. I came to know about you through John Schnepp, oh man, who I went to college with in Chicago. I started watching him when he would Skype into the AMC show John Campea had. I loved his online presence and would write to him about what was discussed on shows. I teach art in a maximum security prison. And in one of those classes, we had a discussion about whether there was going to be a Justice League 2 after the Joss Whedon version. I insisted no, but the guys were committed to the idea that there was to be one. I told them about my friend John and what he did online, and old them, I would ask him to settle the disagreement. John was nice enough to share his thoughts with me and lay out the reasons why there won't be a follow-up film so I could share those ideas with them. He was always very generous and loyal to the people he considered his friends. After his passing, I continued to watch you and John Campea because I feel John lives on through your shows. You could not surpass us give us a greater compliment. In the worlds of both you and your programs, John Schnepp's presence is still felt. Like yourself, I often think of how much John would have loved WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Loki, and I wish I could watch him talk about his great love daily online. So thank you for keeping me connected to John in this specific way. Also, thank you to both John Campea and yourself for the content you provided through the darkest days of the pandemic. Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying so. Your shows were consistent there when so many things were unknown. It was helpful to watch you both talk your way through it separately and together, even when it was confusing and scary, which most of the last year was. The reason why I started typing this was to encourage you to watch Summer of Soul, now in theaters and on Hulu. I think fellow imagination connoisseurs may find enjoyment in the music and the message behind the film. Rob, I know you're a big music fan, and for that reason alone, you should watch it, but there are other reasons to see it. It's a beautiful document of an event that was left out of history. Where Woodstock became a cultural landmark, this event was neglected and forgotten. The film that first-time director Questlove of The Roots created, wow, if he made it, I'll watch it. I didn't know about this, seeks to right the wrong and show the power, emotion, and importance of this 6-weekend-long event with powerhouse performances by legendary black performers in a park in Harlem in 1969, while simultaneously America was landing a man on the moon. There is a moment between Mahalia Jackson and Mavis Staples in the context of acknowledging the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. the year before, which is worth the price of admission. Alone. But that scene is not alone. We're given Nina Simone, Sly and the Family Stone, Stevie Wonder, and so much more. This film speaks to the spirit and resilience of community. It is dynamic, energetic, and will bring a tear to your eye. It is what we look for in films of all genres. It brings out our humanity and shows us something we hadn't seen before, or rather, never seen in this way. This film is beautiful, and I hope that everyone gets to see it. I think you and Elizabeth would really love this film. Keep up the good work, and thanks for sharing your time with us over this very difficult year. Well, Damon, my man, first of all, I can't thank you enough for that letter. That is very meaningful to me. And I'll tell you what, Elizabeth's Whining About Movies is coming back probably next week. In honor of you, sir, this movie, Summer of Soul, will be the first movie we cover for Whining About Movies. So thank you so much for writing in. It means a great deal to me to hear these kinds of things from people like you who've been watching us for a long time, and I very much appreciate hearing from you. But in order to honor you, sir, Summer of Soul will now be our first movie when we bring back Whining About Movies next week. What a great letter, and thank you very much, sir. Let's see. Paul in Long Beach already made me laugh yesterday. I think he's going to make me laugh today. I don't know. So, Rob, Joshua Levesque and I had a friendly wager during the show last week, and I lost. In turn, I offered to buy him a movie at our favorite place when I visit NYC in the fall, the AMC Empire on 42nd Street. He declined, saying for now he'd prefer a letter, which really states that your moderator, Joshua, is a cheap date. Now, I know that a lot of members of the PGS haven't yet had the opportunity to see Tango Shalom. Willow and I saw it on the same day with a few others. I'm particularly jealous that and Joe the lawyer have been able to see it on the big screen with an audience. I'm so looking forward to seeing it in a theater, if only to be able to gauge an audience reaction. But I must say to you, my friend, I really believe that you're not giving yourself enough credit here. If I were you, at the very top of my resume, it would read, acting credits. Dick Bigslighter in a Star Wars porn parody, and the voice of God in Tango Shalom, the world's first Hasidsploitation flick. Come on, Rob. 2 roles that you'll forever be able to hang on your yarmulke. You'll forever be able to hang your yarmulke on yarmulke. I can't say it. Stop selling yourself short, dude. Superman Returns is great, but lastly, since we've had so much talk about actual aliens recently, I have to say that I'm absolutely changed my mind on the subject. I'm a skeptic on everything. You know it. It's hard to be skeptical anymore, I want to believe. What is the proper acronym? UFO, UAP, ID4, CRT, IUD, PGS? Honestly, the images look like unidentified flying tortilla chips, but those videos and the legitimacy of the pilots are impossible to ignore. I believe I've found the answer. Douglas Adams was right. To quote, "The mighty ships tore across the empty wastes of space and finally dived screaming onto the first planet they came across. which happened to be the Earth, where, due to a terrible miscalculation of scale, the entire battle fleet was accidentally swallowed by a small dog. We are giants, not technologically advanced enough to be a threat, but perhaps large enough to kill a battle cruiser with a basketball. We are mostly harmless, but brutal. It's possible that they're more afraid of us than we are of them. And they should be afraid of us. Until we can achieve light speed, we're a developing planet not to be trifled with. And then the bypass comes. Paul, what a great letter. Yeah, you know, I don't usually tell people I played Biggs Darklighter in Star Wars XXX, and it's a speaking role, it's not a sexual performing role. I don't have the cock for that, but, you know, I guess I'm proud of the work. I got to fly an X-Wing with Red Leader Kylie Ireland. Who's going to say no to that? I mean, I got to meet Trina Michaels. There was no downside at all. And it was fun. People are like, what? What, Rob? What are you talking about? It's true. What can I say? Omar94 writes in a letter. Omar says, "Hi, Rob, moderators and the Post-Geek Singularity. This is something you and others can correct me on, since I'm not sure about it myself. Movies which combine genres have worked even after decades, like romantic comedies or action comedies. However, something I don't think works well is fantasy comedy. There are a few exceptions, like the original Ghostbusters, and I guess a number of superhero movies, but for the most part, I don't think they work as well, even if I like the movie. For example, a few fantasy comedies I like are the 1984 Carl Reiner movie All of Me, starring Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin. I like that too. 1993's Heart and Soul, starring Robert Downey Jr., Elizabeth Shue, and Charles Grodin. Even though I like those movies, I always felt they might have worked better if they came out during the classic Hollywood era, where we saw fantasy comedies like the 1937 Cary Grant movie Topper and the 1941 film Here Comes Mr. Jordan. A fantasy comedy I think is just okay is the 2000 Nancy Meyers film What Women Want, starring Mel Gibson, Helen Hunt, Marissa Tomei, Sarah Paulson, Judy Greer, and Alan Alda. However, when I watched it, I kept thinking to myself how the film might have worked for me better if it came out during the classic Hollywood period. I liked the Pixar movie Soul, but I kept thinking about how it might have worked decades earlier, as the movie reminded me of a fantasy film from the 1940s, which was not a comedy, but it had a similar type of story called A Matter of Life and Death, but it's known as Stairway to Heaven in the U.S. I don't know why I think that, but when I see fantasy comedies, I always think they would work better if they were made during the classic Hollywood era than later. As I said earlier, this is something you and others can correct me on, since I'm not sure myself. Thanks, and live long and prosper." Well, Omar, I mean, I can see that. I mean, different eras handle things sort of differently. Wow, I'm schwitzing because it's hot as hell in here. I would say that you're probably not wrong. I mean, it's the sensibility of the era. But have you ever seen Defending Your Life, the Albert Brooks movie with Meryl Streep? Check that out. So yeah, check it out. But yeah, I mean, I think it's all about the era in which movies come out. Really, you know, sensibilities change, and I think the comedic fantasy is a hard movie for us to buy into, especially these days. You really have to have a deft touch to make people buy into it. It's hard. This letter comes from James Snyderman. James Snyderman. "Warm greetings to you, Rob, and to all of the PGS. I haven't written in a while, though I've been watching. So much going on. Anyway, recent events collided with some geeky thoughts I've been having for a while, and what better place to share them than with the PGS. Richard Donner was with us for 91 years and left so many wonderful works behind. One of the most notable was his cinematic interpretation of Superman. The film itself was an achievement in its own right, but like The Last Son of Krypton, it inspired others to aim for the same or even more incredible heights. Anyone who says or enjoys the MCU has Donner to thank. Kevin Feige has said, Richard Donner's Superman, I think, is the paradigm by which we should all follow. It's all there. There was epic scope, drama, humor, and heart in that first Superman feature. The poignant words of Jor-El juxtaposed with the cartoonish buffoonery of Otis coexisted beautifully without ever breaking the verisimilitude. Instead, the combination defined it. Ned Beatty, who played Otis, also recently passed. He too left behind an admirable legacy. His performances demonstrated his tremendous range. That is an epithet any character would be proud to achieve. When people espouse rhapsodically about Superman, as they well should, most don't often start with Otis. For the sake of a fun argument, or an argument for fun, I suggest he's precisely the thing that's missing from modern Superman movies. Trends have recently defined the cinematic Superman. Donner's Superman created a mold. A mold is timeless. Trends are timely. The current trend often confuses dark and crass with meaningful, light and kid-friendly with irrelevant. Otis embodies the height of the comedic tone. He sets the boundary in a way. An audience successfully charmed by humor becomes open to the more meaningful things that they're more amenable to suspending their disbelief. The lightness counterbalances the heaviness, keeping the engagement afloat. That kind of story makes even a child feel safe to go on a grand adventure. I would argue that Superman rated G might just be what we need. Or maybe whatever rating Superman or Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse was. The DCEU isn't constrained by continuity, so go for it. An animated feature would help define it apart from the live-action movies and fit in a family film tone. Maybe centered on what Clark and Lois decide to commit to each other. The minor villain could be Parasite, the primary villain, Brainiac. Each villain presents different challenges. Parasite can physically fight with Superman without having to rely on kryptonite again. Brainiac is the villain to have great dialogue with about the meaning of life and who should be in charge of it. Each villain can also represent the fears in forming relationships in a way when a child could understand. What do we take and give? Who's in control? And what does it mean? What is love? All of that drama, action, and meaning can be expressed in tone that is well served by having some playfulness. Stories about timeless struggles speak to every age. Superman's colors are bold and bright, primary. Maybe we miss something about Superman when those values don't shine through. The colors children are drawn to. Speaking of being drawn, perhaps the visual style of the Fleischer films realized with the finest CG would work well. A classic Superman for a universal audience. Whether you read this to the mighty PGS or not, thank you for being a place where I can express my geekitude. I look forward to seeing the Big Blue on the big screen again in a classic story centered on him and the sound of children cheering him on. With Donner and Beatty in mind, I hope to be transported to an expanse so huge we will all have one foot on Krypton and the other in Otisburg. Good luck with all you're doing with the Burnettwork and your other careers. You always throw a good party. God, what a nice letter, James Snyder, man. I'll tell you something. I have an idea. If I was running Warner Brothers now and I wanted to make a Superman movie, here's what I would do. Here's what I'd do. First of all, I would requisition, let's call it $150 million. All right? $150 million. I would hire Frank Darabont to direct, and he would adapt Superman, A Man for All Seasons. The comic. Superman, A Man for All Seasons, and go do that. And make it an offbeat, not what you're expecting. But Frank Darabont, A Superman for All Seasons. Go, if you want to read that, I request, or I ask, if you haven't read Superman, A Man for All, or a Superman for All, it's either a Superman for All Seasons or it's Superman, A Man for All Seasons. I think it's a Superman for All, I don't remember. But that's what I would do. That's what I would greenlit. If I ran Warner Brothers, I would call Frank Darabont up, and I'm like, bruh, I know you don't want to make movies anymore. I know this Walking Dead thing has kicked your ass, but I want you to adapt Superman, A Man for All Seasons. I want you to direct it. You've got $150 million and not a penny more. Henry Cavill's going to play Superman, and you're going to go make this movie. That's what I would do. Yes. And people are going to be like, but Rob, I'm telling you. If you have the Frank Darabont of the Shawshank Redemption and you have a Superman for All Seasons, and you go make that story, it'd be very much an atypical superhero movie, and people would be like, what? Darabont could pull it off, man. I'm telling you. It'd be so different from any superhero movie, but you make that right. You nail what that does. I'm telling you. It could be outstanding. Outstanding. But that's just me. people probably think, you're crazy, Rob. But yeah, but we'll never know because nobody will ever do that. But I would do it. I would do it. Yes, I would. And I wouldn't think twice. Aaron Johnson writes in. You know what, Aaron? I'm reading this letter in the wake of my excitement about Star Trek the Motion Picture being remastered in 4K. Dear Rob and the PGS, this is my thoughts on the second pilot of Star Trek Where No Man Has Gone Before. Warning, I may go into a rant due to the character that has ESP, Gary Mitchell, who is extremely annoying to the rest of the Starfleet crew, which I seriously did not enjoy, and I really wished the writers could have done better on the second pilot. This is where I'm going to point out to you that it was this second pilot that sold the show to NBC after they commissioned it after the first pilot was rejected. So, just saying, it was this pilot that sold Star Trek. Star Trek wouldn't exist if the network didn't think this was a good pilot. While the episode does introduce James Kirk to the crew of the Enterprise, the first half of the episode is basically your standard introduction to the Enterprise crew, introducing everyone and stuff. It does have its faults when it gets to the mid part of the episode, all thanks to the Gary Mitchell character. I'm going to explain the episode based on me seeing the episode. The USS Enterprise is on an exploratory mission to leave the galaxy. En route, a damaged ship's recorder of the SS Valiant, an Earth spaceship lost 200 years earlier, is found. Its record is incomplete, but it reveals that the Valiant had been swept from its path by a magnetic space storm and that the crew had been frantically searching for information about extrasensory perception in the ship's library computer. The recording ends with the captain of the Valiant apparently giving a self-destruct order. So when Captain Kirk decides that they need to know what happened to the Valiant and the Enterprise crosses the edge of the galaxy, there it encounters a strange barrier which damages the ship's systems and warp drive, forcing a retreat. At the same time, 9 crew members are killed, and both helmsman Gary Mitchell and the ship's psychiatrist, Dr. Elizabeth Daner, Sally Kellerman, is recognized by way of another TV show, MASH, as Hot Lips. No, Sally Kellerman was Hot Lips in the movie MASH, not in the TV series. That would be Loretta Swit. They are knocked unconscious by the barrier's effect. When he awakens, Mitchell's eyes glow silver and he begins to display remarkable psychic powers. Mitchell becomes increasingly arrogant and hostile toward the rest of the crew, declaring that he has become godlike, enforcing his desires with fearsome displays of telepathic and telekinetic power. Science Officer Spock comes to believe that the Valiant crew members may have experienced the same phenomenon and destroyed the ship to keep the power from spreading. He advises Kirk that Mitchell may have to be killed before his powers develop further, but Kirk angrily disagrees. Alarmed that Mitchell may take over the Enterprise, Kirk decides to maroon him at the unmanned lithium cracking facility on the remote planet of Delta Vega. Once there, the landing party tries to confine Mitchell, but his powers have become too great. He kills Navigator Lieutenant Kelso and escapes by knocking out Kirk and Spock, taking with him Dr. Daner, who now has developed similar powers. Kirk follows and appeals to Daner's humanity for help. Before Mitchell can kill Kirk, the Doctor attacks and weakens him. Mitchell fatally injures Daner, but before he can recover from the effort, Kirk uses a phaser rifle to create a rock slide, killing Mitchell. Back on the Enterprise, Kirk makes a log entry that both Daner and Mitchell gave their lives in the performance of duty. He explains to Spock that he wants his friend's service record to end positively. He didn't ask for what happened to him. That's right. Aaron's rant about this episode. What is kind of disruptive is how Gary Mitchell, played by Gary Lockwood, abuses his ESP and runs amok all over the place and causes trouble for select members of the Enterprise crew. If this officer that has ESP was like a dog that tends to go annoy his neighbors, the other officers in the episode, as well as the writers, would seriously have him put down for insubordination toward the other Starfleet officers. I was rolling my eyes at Mitchell, thinking that this is extremely annoying that he would be rude to the other Starfleet officers. And contrary to everyone's belief that this is the second pilot, most scenes of this episode, mostly involving Mitchell, are not that good. When you look at later in this episode, Mitchell gets in a fight with Kirk, and you see Kirk's uniform torn, and my reaction is, geez, Kirk doesn't need to take this from a guy who has ESP. He should be beating the crap out of him. As soon as the fight with Mitchell concluded, Kirk did get back on the Enterprise safely, and Spock talked him. Okay, let's hold up right there. Gary Mitchell doesn't just have ESP. He has all kinds of psychokinetic powers. He can do things to people. ESP is just perception. Gary Mitchell is way beyond ESP. He's turning into a god. He's turning into a godlike entity. He casts his hands out, and he can create the Garden of Eden. The whole point of this story, sir, respectfully, is all about absolute power corrupting absolutely. Are human beings who suddenly are imbued with godlike powers, do they have the wherewithal? Do they have the soul to understand how to temper that power? I mean, if you could make anything you want happen in front of you, what would you do with that power? And that's what the story is about. It's not about, I mean, Gary Mitchell is beyond rank. He's beyond all of that. He's moved into a whole different realm that humanity probably was never meant to be in. And that's the whole point of the story. What happens when a mere mortal, is imbued with godlike powers? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Anyway, I will say this, though. For a second pilot, it has both good and bad moments. The bad moments are mostly Gary Mitchell related. The good moments, which I did enjoy, are related to Kirk interacting with the crew before and after the whole mess with Mitchell happens. And in my opinion, the subtitle for this episode should just be The Officer Who Knew Way Too Much, because Mitchell clearly had been extremely annoying to the other officers. And I was looking at that thinking, this is completely hostile. Kirk didn't need to put up with that. The officers could have done a better job of disposing of Mitchell, but seriously, the episode could have had far more potential. It is awful due to the amount of times Gary Mitchell annoys Kirk and the other Starfleet officers. I pity the poor sucker that tries to get through this episode without wanting to turn the TV off due to Mitchell's behavior, which was uncalled for. It may take me writing multiple Trek letters about different episodes from different series to recover from this, but I seriously didn't like how Gary Mitchell acted, and he is the worst character in the series. All I can say is this episode should have been better than what we got, because it felt like the writers were having a bad day when making the story. And thanks for listening. Sincerely, Aaron Johnson. Aaron, you've been watching the show for a long time. But respectfully, sir, you are wrong. You are wrong. Where No Man Has Gone Before is a terrific episode of Star Trek. It's a terrific episode of science fiction. Come on, man. And you have to remember, it wasn't just about a man being insubordinate to his superiors. It was about a human being becoming a god. Ask yourself, Aaron, if one day you had the power to do anything you wanted, what would you do? Would you just be nice to people because you had this omnipotent power? Would you go around like Oprah going, you get a car and you get a house and you get a boat and you get a college education and giving everybody what they want? Would you become an ultimate do-gooder? You know, or would you do something else? I think that's what the episode's about. I think you should try watching it again. You know, forget Gary Mitchell being annoying. He might very well be to you. To each his own. But I would try and watch it with that in mind. Ask yourself when you watch that episode, if you were Gary Mitchell, but say it was here on Earth, what would you do with all that power? You could make anything happen. For me, I'd give myself $2 billion in a slush fund, and I'd go off and make a bunch of movies. I'd hire all my friends, all the people I thought were talented. Like, I'd give Charlie de Lauzirika $20 million to go make his movie. I'd give Dave Parker $20 million to go make his movie. As a matter of fact, I'd give a lot of people. I'd see if Chris Stuckman's movie turned out well, and then I'd give him $20 million. I'd give Campia some money to make a new documentary. You know, that's what I would do. That's if I had one wish. I'd give myself a $2 billion fund. I'd have a bunch of people make a bunch of movies and employ thousands, and maybe buy a new wing at USC, the Robert Meyer Burnett Center for Genre Studies. That's what I'd do if I was Gary Mitchell. I mean, people might do something else. You never know. Anyway, let's see. Let's see what you all are saying. What a bunch of great letters. But now that I've got a bad taste in my mouth for somebody besmirching the second pilot for Star Trek. No, I'm just kidding. Especially after I'm on my, lest we forget, Star Trek The Motion Picture is coming out. They're remastering it in 4K. But it's going to be on Paramount Plus. How about a week-long theatrical run there, buddies? Can we do that? Hello, Paramount. I'm asking you imagination connoisseurs, let's start a letter writing campaign. Star Trek The Motion Picture in 4K in IMAX theaters across the land. Make it happen. It only has to be for a week. Who wouldn't want it? Maybe I'll just call up IMAX myself and be like, bruh, it's Burnett calling. I've got an idea. Let's make it happen. Let's make it happen like right away. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Why can't you make that happen? I mean, I think it's only right. It should happen. I mean, and if it doesn't, you're going to hear from me. I'm going to bitch, and I'm going to moan, and I'm going to complain. So, Flashdance that shit. Take my passion and make it happen. Let's see where... it's Willow. Willow is here. Willow says, I didn't know you worked on Free Willy. Did you know the movie inspired a huge campaign to free Keiko, the orca who once played Willy? I may have heard of that. Yes, I did. While Keiko did eventually get freed, he was unable to reintegrate into wild orca society and sadly died shortly after. I know it's true. It was kind of a bummer, and by the way, he didn't have a great life down there in Mexico way. It wasn't good. I'm glad he got out. Aaron Singh says, Rob, camera issues got in the way of our J-horror discussion. Ready when you are. Rock on, dude. Well, Aaron Singh, maybe we'll do that on Midnight Metal on Friday. And Andre from Midnight's Edge are going to be coming on. And I promise I won't drink and get all crazy like we did on Saturday's Midnight Metal. So there you go. Cyber Shaman X sends in a super chat and says, I can't wait for the 4K box set of Star Trek 1 through 4. I can, because why isn't 5 and 6 in there? I mean, come on, man. How do you release a box set of 4K versions of Star Trek's 1, 2, 3, and 4 and not do 5 and 6? Really? The sign-off of the classic crew? How lame is that? Like, what kind of world do we live in? What brain trust thought that was okay? Well, Rob, we're going to end on Star Trek 4. You know, it's the best of them. No. Give us all of them. Why are you doing that? I mean, but it doesn't matter, because lest we all forget, yes, that's right. Star Trek the Motion Picture, the director's edition's being remastered in 4K. Stub McShave says, in the article, it said that Peter Jackson had written a treatment for a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Have you seen his treatment? I have not. I think it was either 4 or 5, maybe. But I have not. Dave Scow could probably tell us the difference. Cyber Shaman X says Secret Hideout is working on a remaster of Deep Space Nine. Oh, I hope not. I've not heard that for real. I've heard it rumored, but I hope that they're not. Also, have you seen the remaster of Babylon 5? Not on physical media, though. Not many physical media releases these days. I have seen the remaster. I think it's good. But I really wish... I mean, the effects could have stood to be remastered. But it's good. You know, it's good. It's too bad they didn't do it in the beginning. But yeah, I'm a fan. In Somatic 101, probably sent in a super chat sticker that I missed because I was reading. But thank you for that, in Somatic 101. I appreciate that. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, what's up, Rob? I just want to take a minute and pay my respects to one of the Jedi Masters of filmmaking, Richard Donner. Many people remember him for Lethal Weapon and Superman, but a movie he made that I think is underrated is 16 Blocks. Respect to Richard Donner. Yeah, that was his last film, and I really liked 16 Blocks. I thought 16 Blocks was good. Sends in a super chat sticker with a diamond, I would imagine. A diamond in the rough, as it were. John is here. John sends in a tip and says, hi, Rob. I'm ecstatic over the news that Star Trek the Motion Picture is coming out on 4K. I remember sitting in the CCU waiting room waiting for news of my dad. Oh, Carmelo's condition. By the way, for those of you who don't remember, John's dad, Carmelo, was the official, actually, I guess he still is, the official father of the Post-Geek Singularity of Robservations. He passed along, unfortunately. I'm ecstatic over the news that Star Trek the Motion Picture is coming out on 4K. I remember sitting in the CCU waiting room, waiting for news of my dad, Carmelo's condition, when your video convinced me to get the director's cut of it. I remember seeing the film at the theater the day of release, and I remember being in awe of the shots of the Enterprise as Kirk and Scotty boarded her. I always loved the film and was very happy with the director's cut. Thanks for all that you do. Well, thanks for being a good son, sir. And thanks for being a foundational member of the Post-Geek Singularity. I really appreciate that, and I'm glad we showed pictures of your dad and you on the channel. That was very special. And I know, look, man, Star Trek the Motion Picture, I can't explain to people, like, Star Trek was my religion, and starting when I was like 5 years old, I knew everything. I could tell you every episode title. I watched Star Trek for 7 years of my life, and I watch it like every night. I was obsessed with Star Trek. Obsessed. I still kind of am. Although it's kind of sad. I mean, I'm looking over at my bookshelf of many, 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 many Star Trek books over there, and I'm like, my enthusiasm for the franchise has really killed me, and that's why I'm so excited to get Star Trek the Motion Picture, because, it's a movie that I dearly love, and again, it's hard to explain to people what it was like to know that, like, loving Star Trek, I'd resolved myself as a kid. It was like one of the hard lessons of life to learn that there just wasn't going to be any more Star Trek. That's why I loved Star Trek novels. That's why I read the Blish adaptations. And when you'd get a Star Trek technical manual, the medical reference manual, or the insanity of Star Trek maps that came out with the Guide to Astrogation, I mean, that was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, I mean, yeah, to get that, it was great stuff. But anyway, I digress. Where was I? SK Zhang sends in a super chat and says, Green Lantern, Fantastic Four, now Loki fights a fart cloud. Hold on there, son. Loki fights a fart cloud? I think not. As a matter of fact, I mean, I don't necessarily want to get into Loki spoilers. I guess I kind of have to answer this question. But that, for those of you who have watched Loki, that was Alioth the Usurper. And Alioth the Usurper is a canonical character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and presented basically exactly how he looks in the comics. Now, I think I will read this. As a matter of fact, let me get into this. And so those of you, because a lot of people are talking about like Loki a fart cloud. I mean, it's like, look, man, I always like the opportunity to talk about, like, okay, if that's what you think, that that's what's going on here. I would say that you can say that if you want. For those of you, we're going to get into it. Let me just call up this article, and because I'm going to call up this article and educate everybody about this, because I've been getting it all day long, and I'm like, come on, guys, come on, really? So on what we saw on Loki today, here, this comes from Marvel, the Marvel wiki, or it's actually in Marvel.com. Alioth the Usurper. Allegedly the first being to free itself from the time stream, Alioth grew in power, becoming the supreme time being over all realities from the dawn of life on Earth to the edge of Kang the Conqueror's dominion. A temporal barrier blocked Alioth from entering Kang's realm, Chronopolis, and conquering all time periods. After Kang was rendered comatose, saving the Terminatrix, Ravonna Renslayer, who is in the show, she took over Kang's empire. Exploring an anomaly at the edge of Kang's domain, she encountered the time barrier. Curious, she blasted it to learn what it hid, apparently summoning or releasing Alioth. Terminatrix fled, but Alioth followed, assaulting Chronopolis City. Aided by her own potential future self-revelation, Terminatrix revived Kang, but Alioth absorbed the Council of Cross-Time Kangs. So this is Alioth right here, who is depicted in the Loki series almost exactly the way he was depicted in Marvel Comics. So I must differ with you, SK Zhang. What we saw in the Loki series was a deep dive into Marvel mythology. And I guess it's not going to tell me the first appearance, but there you go. So it is not a fart cloud, as you say. That is Alioth, a creature that is, well, if you know Kang's history, I'm kind of excited because it looks like our boy Kang is going to make an appearance next week, and we know that he's a big deal, and I guess that means we saw Chronopolis, as somebody said, in the quantum realm, so that would make sense. So there you go. But anyway, thanks for writing in, SK Zhang. I appreciate it. Mikey Lito comes in and says, hopefully this will leave you with a better taste in your mouth, Rob. Bad Robot and Secret Hideout will have absolutely positively nothing to do with the 4K Director's Edition of Star Trek The Motion Picture. Oh, you certainly know how to put a smile on my face. You're goddamn right they don't. Rightfully so. Anyway, I'm pretty excited. Did I mention? No, you've heard it too much. Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls, gentle beings, all of you from across the 28 known galaxies, I want to thank you for... thanks, Rob. I've been educated, says SK Zhang. Well, thank you, SK Zhang. I appreciate it. Yeah, Alioth is a major... Well, as far as... I think next week we'll learn more, but everybody's going to be talking about Alioth. Everyone. And I liked the way he was depicted. I thought it was pretty cool. But, I mean, I can understand why you said that. But, it's a big deal, especially with Kang the Conqueror and Immortus and all that. We're going to learn all kinds about it next week. But thank you. But, yeah, a lot of people have been saying that kind of stuff. And one of the things about the Loki series is, man, talk about a deep dive into Marvel mythology. I found Loki to be sort of a mixed bag now. It really depends how they stick the landing. I hope they stick the landing. We'll see where it goes. I thought it started strong, but then it got a little weird, and I feel like it's been a little bit treading water, although, I mean, if Richard E. Grant's in it, I mean, come on. But anyway, I'm going to end episode 717, or wait a minute, this is 717, right? Of Robservations, and I want to thank you for indulging me. I thought it was important. The 20th anniversary of, well, it would have been in May, but it's 20 years later at the Cannes Film Festival, and since I have a film there, I wanted to talk about what happened with Lord of the Rings, how the fortunes of Lord of the Rings changed at the Cannes Film Festival because perception was altered, and I kind of, in a way, am hoping maybe the fortunes of us with Tango Shalom will change. But you know what, Paul in Long Beach? I'm not going to start saying, hey, remember me from Star Trek XXX and playing the voice of God at the beginning of Tango Shalom? I'm not going to do that. Behold the promised land. I won't do that. But anyway, first of all, I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Joshua Levesque is here. Justin Toner is here. I think is here too. But all of my great blue wrenches. I don't know if Louise X Sparrow is here. It might be a little late for Louise, but thank you all for being here. Thank you to my great moderating staff, and I want to thank everybody who generously supports this channel via super chats or tips. Thank you so very much. Keeps the home fires burning, which is good. And also thank you for everybody who writes letters. If you want to write me a letter, you can at the Burnettwork.net website. A lot of stuff there. And if you've ever wanted to be on YouTube, we do have a partner program for people that want to create content for the Burnettwork. I mean, use it as a jump-off point for your own YouTube aspirations, but we have information about the content program up on the website. So check that out if you've ever wanted to do that. Hey, we can offer you our almost 40,000 subscribers. Still a small channel, but it takes a while to get up your own subscribers. So if you want to do a 6-part mini-series on the channel to bolster your subscribers and use it to promote your own channel, hey, you can do that too. Either way, check out the website. And we are bringing Whining About Movies back with the announcement of the awards for the film festival. And now we have our first movie. So that's exciting. Anyway, on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to all of you, have a better day. And I'm still trying to end this stream, which apparently I forgot how to do it. So maybe this time.